Welcome to the Self-Wealth Real Estate Podcast with your host, Luke Borda. Today, I'm interviewing a friend and successful real estate investor, Elizabeth Kelly. Some of you may know her because she is an excellent coach in Ontario. So she coaches a lot of real estate investors, newer people starting out, as well as more experienced people. Elizabeth has done a wide variety of investing strategies, rent-to-owns, multifamily, commercial properties, all kinds of things. She's run a property management company for many years in Kirkland Lake, Ontario, and she's invested kind of across Ontario as well as in New Brunswick. She's very experienced. She's been investing a long time. She used to coach or be a trainer with Rich Dad Poor Dad. And so I'm really happy to have her here. I've known her for years. I can't even remember where I met her, but I've known her for a long time. And I know she's the real deal. And I always appreciate seeing her at events and talking to her about this. So it was a really good conversation for us. We're talking about a lot of things that have impacted us over the years. And I think you guys are going to get a lot of this conversation. So without further ado, here is Elizabeth Kelly. Welcome to the Self-Wealth Real Estate Podcast. Today I have Elizabeth Kelly on with me. Elizabeth, welcome. Thanks for joining us. I would like to know your background. How'd you get started in real estate and what did you do before real estate?
It's funny. I don't have one of those good stories. You know how there's some people who have like those awesome proposal stories? I don't have one of those for real estate. It's literally like I met my husband. He had just bought his first investment property and we decided to go on that adventure together. I remember, before when we were dating, up until 3 a.m. installing tile floors in duplexes. And yeah, we just, my husband had a vision for what he wanted retirement to look like. And he thought that real estate was a good way to get there. And so we started buying single family homes, duplexes, condos in Newmarket, Ontario. And then he went to a 2-hour Rich Dad seminar and he came back. He's like, oh crap. He's like, there's a way we're supposed to be doing this. And then there's the way we're doing it. Right. I was like, oh, okay. So we invested $60,000 in our Rich Dad education, and we just kind of blew up from there. Within the next year and a half, we bought 100 units in multifamilies in Ontario and New Brunswick, and it was crazy. It was wild. We're doing rent-to-owns, and yeah, those were the days when financing was easy and lenders liked investors.
I didn't know you'd bought 100 units of multifamily in that time. What around what year was that you did that?
2009, 2010.
Okay. Yeah, quite a while. Awesome. That's really cool. So what was next? So you said, was it over a year you said you bought, or over a couple of years you said you bought 100 units?
We started investing in 2005. And then, so 2010 was when they brought in the changes and they said, hey, investors have to put 20% down for mortgages. And then, as is typical, like we're seeing right now with the environment, a whole bunch of investors went, what? We can't invest anymore. This is terrible. The world is falling. The sky is falling. And a whole bunch of investors just left. So we're just kind of looking around and there's like half the number of people investing that there was. So we're like, okay, so we want to make a go of this. We need to figure out what we're going to do about this obstacle. So then we started learning about RSPs and RSP mortgages. And then we're like, awesome. So we're going to put 20% down. And a little while later, we're going to pull out 10%. Or if we're buying under market value, a little while later, we're going to pull out 15%. We'll make sure we always leave a 10% buffer, but we're not leaving all our money in there. So that was...
So kind of the BRRRR strategy before it was called the BRRRR strategy.
Yeah, there was a lot of stuff we did. Like we were putting basement apartments in single family homes in Newmarket. And back then it was like, oh, we're putting in a basement apartment. Like that was what we called it. That's how technical we were.
Yeah.
2008, we're putting in a basement apartment. Now they've got fancy titles and there's all kinds of like permutations of it. But back then it was really simple. And I mean, the world as a real estate investor was so different back then.
Yeah. Things have changed over time. Yeah, well, even if there were, I didn't know about them, right? Like I bought my first rental in 2007, turned it into a rooming house in Toronto. Not entirely legal. But I didn't know about all this stuff. I didn't even know I could be a full-time real estate investor. I didn't know that was an option. I thought you only bought rentals for retirement and held the long term. I didn't know anything else because I wasn't in the community. I didn't know people in it. I knew people who invested in real estate, but not kind of in the entrepreneurial startup way that we do. So yeah, that's really cool. So you were doing all of that stuff. Now, at some point, I know your background. For those who don't know Elizabeth, she's an excellent real estate coach in Ontario. Coaches a lot of people, probably across Canada, I'm sure, on a wide variety of strategies. And you bring in a lot of experts to help out and teach. And I know at some point you were a coach with Rich Dad.
I was a trainer for Rich Dad.
Trainer. Okay.
So, so we finished taking our courses, I guess maybe 2010. And then one of our favorite course instructors, Jean Lebeau, who taught the creative financing course, shout out to Jean because he's amazing and has helped so many Canadian real estate investors. And he asked us if we would come in and do a presentation on what we were doing, a year, 2 years after finishing our education. And we came in and we enjoyed it so much that he asked us back for the next one. And then my husband has a very large personality, which you know. So he kind of came in, and then the next thing you know, he was kind of like teaching along with Jean. He was covering some of the aspects of the course, and we were just so happy to be there. And then they had an opening that came up to teach the lease options course. And at that time, we had done a whole bunch of lease options. So we said, absolutely. We started teaching lease options. And then they said, hey, we need someone for sales and negotiations. Do you want to do that? And I said, well, I'll do that, but only if I do it with Emmett. So we became the first couple teaching real estate investing for Rich Dad. And then I had the opportunity in 2016 to write my own course. It was called Momentum, and it was all the fundamentals that real estate investors needed to know or information they needed to have to start doing real estate as a business. Not dabbling in okay, I'm going to buy a single family home and call it a day, but if I want to become an entrepreneur and build a business, what do I need to know? So it was asset protection and accounting and structures and basics, And so I wrote that course. And I taught it for 5 years.
And was that on your own, or is that through? Okay.
Yeah, no, I taught that on my own, and it was amazing. I had the best time. I absolutely loved doing it. And then they went under, I guess, the beginning of COVID, 2020, they went under. So at that point, I'd already done some coaching a little bit on the side for people that I'd met through my networking and that kind of stuff. But I opened my own coaching business at the beginning of 2020.
Okay, nice.
Yeah.
So on your real estate investment side, you did basement apartments, you did lease options, you did all these different things. Was there, in the entire time you've been investing, has there been a favorite strategy of yours?
Up to this point, my favorite strategy has always been rent-to-owns, because my background before I left my job was I was an event planner and a fundraiser for charity for 10, 12 years. And then I had my insurance license and I did home, auto, and life insurance. So my background was always wanting to help people. It was wanting to give back. It was wanting to provide value and to make people's lives better. So I didn't resonate as much with the multifamily. Like my husband as an engineer, he loves the multifamily and the renovations and looking at the mechanicals and all that kind of stuff. For me, it's always been about the people. So what kind of experience did I want to provide? What kind of housing did I want to provide? I just found that rent-to-owns resonated a lot more for me because I loved the idea of taking, families, people who had been struggling, lost their jobs or, had some health issues, and being able to help them with that dream of home ownership again. I loved that piece of it. So up until the last year, I would say rent-to-owns was always my number one go-to, but I'm kind of loving my commercial building and how much I'm enjoying looking at spaces now and saying, what is the best use of this space? And that's really changed for me because, with rent-to-owns, you buy homes and you use them as homes.
Yeah. But what do you mean your commercial building?
Well, we have a commercial building. It's about 30,000 square feet in Northern Ontario in Kirkland Lake. And it wasn't doing very well. It never really recovered from COVID. And so I took over management of it in April this year. And I'm like, what happened? We lost the restaurant during COVID. We lost the dance studio during COVID. We lost a whole bunch of the miners. The mines after Christmas of 2019. They never brought them back. They never brought the workers back after because of COVID. So I kind of looked at the building with fresh eyes in April and I said, how do I turn this around? And it has been so rewarding to be able to, look at the community, figure out what the needs are, figure out how I can meet the needs, and then look for the spaces where everything resonates. And the results that I'm seeing are almost instantaneous, which I absolutely love too.
So a little more info on the building. Is it like a strip plaza? Is it a century building with office above?
It was built in 1965. It was a senior's home. So you'll know probably about 20 years ago, the government changed a lot of the requirements around housing seniors, and they had to start having a washroom for each room for the seniors.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
So, and then this building didn't have that. So this was originally the seniors home that was run by the town of Kirkland Lake. And so they started trying to do retrofits and like build bathrooms in each of these rooms. And the logistics of it were a nightmare. So they finally gave up and they built a brand new seniors building right adjacent to the hospital. Better location. They were happier there. So somebody else who ran seniors homes bought the building with the vision of turning it over, and they ended up giving up on that as well because it was too costly. So the building sat vacant for 10 years. So then we bought the building with this vision of being able to provide housing, short-term, medium-term housing for people who were coming to Kirkland Lake to work. You know, they were contractors, construction, miners, whoever it was. And then there's all these other areas of where when it was a seniors residence that gave us the opportunity to be more creative and flexible, but we hadn't really figured out those pieces. We'd had some good tenants, like the dance studio was there for 5 years. Restaurant had been there for 3 years. So now I kind of got a blank slate and it was a lot of fun. It gave me the opportunity to be able to start doing Airbnb, which was something that I learned about on my Resilience Summit last year. I was like, I really want to do Airbnb. I need to find a property. And I suddenly went, I need to do marketing and advertising for my commercial building. Why don't I just fix up some of the spaces I already have and flip them into Airbnb? And I did that. Now I have 4 listings and it's been a blast. I love it. I love short-term rentals.
Yeah, short-term rentals can be really enjoyable to do, especially like if you have a good, unique space and people are really happy when you go there. Like if it's well renovated and you're not dealing with all the complaints and the issues, then it becomes a pain because you're terrified. You know, if you get a mice in your listing, if you get insects or something, and then you get bad reviews based on it, it can be stressful. But when it's, you know, a nicely renovated space that attracts people for like uniqueness and things like that, I find it's really enjoyable to manage those because people are just having a great time. They're so happy there. And it's really nice being part of that.
Yeah. Actually, it's funny. One of our first listings, I love that you mentioned that, Luke, because one of our first listings, they're like, the building is creepy at night. I'm pretty sure it's haunted. 3 stars.
I mean, you should make one of these units just like Halloween themed or haunted themed and be like, I mean, thinking about it, how many people have died in that building? Quite a few.
Hundreds.
Yep, for sure.
Definitely haunted. I love it. It's totally haunted.
Yeah, I've always wanted to do more commercial. I really only own 1 commercial unit total. And I think, yeah. My family, my dad had, I guess my family has a industrial building in Toronto, quite large, that my dad had bought in 1980. And now I'm one of the trustees that manages it. But yeah, I love it. I love the light industrial buildings, especially those kind of older 50s, 60s builds. I feel like they're maybe not as expensive as some of the newer builds with the higher clear ceiling heights and things like that. I'd love to get into them, but the cap rates have gotten so low on them in the past 3 to 5 years that I can't justify buying them, any of them right now. But if I find the right building, I'd love to buy one of those older light industrial buildings. I think there's a lot of future potential and they're not building them in the same way anymore. So I really like them. I'd like to get into that kind of stuff as well, but I have to find the right opportunity. Absolutely.
And I mean, I've known you for years. I can't even remember when we met. Like, it's been years, but I didn't know. What is it? What is your vision with that building? Like, is it fully functional, operational, just does its own thing? Is there an opportunity in the future for you to repurpose? Like, where's that building at right now?
It's industrial and it's zoned industrial. I've my dad had me working on that building physically since I was a kid. We'd open up new walls when tenants changed, cut through brick. Like, I remember doing all of this stuff growing up, like learning construction on this building. So, but it's 100. My family owns half of the building. It's 180,000 square feet in Toronto. And it's divided amongst 5 tenants right now. So there's 50,000, 25,000 square foot spaces. It's divided up. And yeah, so long term, there's a plumbing supply store. There's a quasi-governmental, it's government funded kind of educational learning thing that's been there 20 or 30 years. Things like that. So it's it's rented as a commercial space. So it's industrial. You get your per square foot rent plus the TMI or MIT, however you break it down, your taxes, maintenance, and insurance that are paid by the tenant. And what was really interesting actually on this building was we installed a solar system on the roof, I think about 2011, over 10 years ago now. So the roof was due, expensive roof, and actually the tenants over time do pay into the replacement of the roof. But we got a mortgage on the building to replace the roof and install solar panels under a FIT contract back when the government was paying a higher rate. And it was not to drag this out, but basically we put 500 kilowatts of solar panels on it with a 250 kilowatt inverter, which means there's peak times during the summer when you're producing more power and it can't be used through the inverter. But the difference was the government at the time was paying 72 cents a kilowatt for a 250 kilowatt inverter, but 54 cents a kilowatt for a 500 kilowatt inverter. So when you look at the peak hours through the day and winter time, like, you're going to be hitting that full 250 earlier in the day by double oversizing the panel load. So the point of all of that was not only are the tenants essentially repaying for the roof, but the panels that they got a mortgage to pay for the roof and all the panels, and the solar contract pays that mortgage back off. So 20-year solar contract, 20-year mortgage with term and amortization pays off the roof and the solar, plus the tenants actually pay back the roof as well. So that works out really well. Yes, yeah. At 72 cents a kilowatt at the time, the government was, Hydro was charging around 8 cents a kilowatt at the time that we got that FIT contract at 72 cents a kilowatt. So if you wonder why electricity rates have gone up, they're probably charging something closer to 20 cents a kilowatt now. It used to be 8 cents. Obviously, it's gone up insanely in the past, 10, 15 years. And part of that is, a lot of mismanagement, but also really high rates that they were paying on these feed-in tariff and microfit contracts.
Wow. That's wild. I had no idea. Well, good for you. Sounds like it was a very wise investment.
Yeah. It wasn't my decision, I have to say. So I just benefited from it indirectly, I guess. But it was interesting to go through and see all of that and still have it. And at the end of by the time the FIT contract is done, at the end of the 20 years, the mortgage is paid off, but also we still have the panels on the roof. So we won't have a contract to produce power, but at a minimum, we can use it as a flow through where the tenants use our power and we bill the tenants for it instead of at the same rate as the hydro company would bill them. So there's still benefit of it after the 20-year term.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow.
Back to you. You had mentioned your favorites, RTO or lease. What's the difference? Is there a difference between RTO and lease options, and what are they?
I use the terms interchangeably. I'm not sure if there's some people who, have come up with a very technical definition, but basically rent-to-own, lease options, it's the opportunity for someone to purchase the property at a future date, and typically the price is fixed at the beginning. So we kind of adapted it over time and included, the initial option consideration, the monthly credits, those have all been added, but you can do them with a single family home. I love to do them with multi-units. The numbers are a lot stronger with multi-units with rent-to-owns. You can do them with pretty much anything. It's kind of like leasing a car, right? With a buyout at the end.
So can you give me an example of a very, not a specific property, but just a generic made up property, 123 Main Street. You want to do a simple rent to own to a prospective rent to own tenant. What would that look like?
Sure. And again, this is, how I structure my business. This is an investment model that allows for a lot of differing, so people can run their numbers differently. But typically for me, what I do is I would say, okay, what is fair market rent? Let's say it's a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom house. What is fair market rent? If my tenant buyers want CMHC insurance at the end, I have to adhere to CMHC guidelines, and they say that you can't charge more than fair market rent. That's fine. So let's say the house rents for $2,500 a month. And then let's say they're going to need $50,000 for down payment at the end. They come in with $30,000. So average term is 36 months. That's how long most tenants need to repair their credit, save up the rest of their down payment, everything that they need. So I take the $50,000 minus the 30 they're coming in with. That leaves me 20. Divide that by the 36 months. That tells me how much extra they're paying every month. So I sign 2 contracts. The rent payment is governed by the lease, so they get all the rights and privileges that they would have as a normal tenant in Ontario, and we know they're extensive. And then they also sign an option contract, and this is the part that says, I have the right to purchase this property on or before this date for this amount of money. I have given this amount as my initial option consideration. I further agree to pay this amount each month. With the intention that I'm going to purchase this property at the end of the 36-month term. And basically, it's kind of like bridge financing for homeowners. There's where they are now. They've had some issues with credit. Maybe they're struggling to save up down payment. They're tired of having to move. They're tired of being forced out of their house because the landlord wants to sell or whatever else. They say, we just want to put down roots. We want to know that this place is going to be ours. So the banks have looked at them and said, either you don't have enough down payment or your credit's poopy. And so we put them in our financial education program. And then, the time kind of chugs along. And ideally at the end, they're going to buy. If they don't buy, then they might need an extension. They might need a little more time. We're fine with that. I have had a few tenants who, for various reasons, have walked away. Some of them, the marriage has split up. Some of them, employment hasn't happened. They've had illness, those kinds of things. So they couldn't qualify for the mortgage at the end. Each person's situation is different. But, if you're offering housing with good integrity, you're going to try and work out a solution where, everybody at least walks away. They might not be perfect. They might not be thrilled, but at least it's a situation that's fair. That's always my goal.
So I'll throw together some ballpark numbers based on that example. So let's say you are the investor, Elizabeth, and you buy a house for $450,000, and you're selling this on a rent-to-own contract to someone who has $30K. They have $30K now, so they're going to give you $30K now. You paid $450. You put whatever down you want to put. Let's say you put your 20% down, but they give you back $30K now, and then they need $50K. Let's say if they want to go with 10% down at the end of their 36 at 3 years, when they're the plan is that they buy the house from you in 3 years. At the end of the 36 months, they're going to pay you, let's say, a little bit more. You're accounting for increasing the value of the property. So instead of $450, they're going to pay you $500. So in that case, that's one of the ways you make money. You've gotten a higher sale price, not necessarily with a realtor on the sale either. So you're not necessarily taking commissions out of that. So you're getting an extra $50K on the sale. They've given you $30 up front, but to get that $50K down payment that they're going to need as well, because they're now putting 10% down on $500,000 at the end of 3 years, they're short $20,000. Now they move in as a tenant, they pay you $2,500 a month, but then they also need to pay you $20,000 over 3 years, which is about $550 a month. So they're paying you $3,050 a month. And at the end of 36 months, they've now built up a $20,000 credit on the option contract with you, plus the $30,000 they already gave you. They have their $50,000 down payment. They fixed their credit. They can go to the bank, get their mortgage, and buy you out at a higher price. Plus you've made money renting it to them. And you were subsidized on the purchase because they gave you the money for the option contract in the first place. So you didn't have as much of a down payment in the first place. So there's a lot of different ways you can win. And yeah, that makes sense. That example, those numbers kind of work out.
Yeah, that's fantastic. You did a much better job than I did. And then the third way you make money in rent-to-owns is the mortgage pay down. So you've now had, $20,000 or whatever it is of mortgage pay down over the 3 years. So yeah.
And you haven't paid it. And you haven't paid anything in taxes over 3 years. You've been able to defer that most likely until you're selling as well.
Yes.
So
yeah, exactly. So yeah, it's a really powerful strategy.
And it's capital gains, honestly. it's capital gains on the sale, I assume, which means it's only half tax.
Well, it depends who you are. If you are if you are an active investor, then you can actually count that as active income. Like if you have a rent-to-own company, then you can count it as active income. If you are the person who is on title, then yes, it is capital gains.
Yes. And it can be the same person, the active investor and the person on title, but a pretty common model that we see in Ontario is somebody, an active investor who knows how to find rent-to-own tenants and the right properties and put the deal together. They'll be considered the active investor, but they'll bring in a partner who can buy the property, qualify for the bank mortgage initially, be on title, and then there would be some sort of profit share between the active investor and the on title, more passive investor.
Yes. There's actually two. It's interesting to see how the world of rent-to-owns has morphed, because now there's people who do rent-to-owns as joint ventures, and then there's also companies that do rent-to-owns, but they do it as a service provider model. So that the person who qualifies for the mortgage and is the investor, they own 100% of the deal, but they pay a company fees like a property manager, but it's like a rent-to-own manager, and they handle all the headaches and everything else, but the other person doesn't have to split the profit 50-50.
Oh, that's an interesting model. I don't know that I had heard of that. That's really cool. Okay. So, at some point during your investing journey, you moved up to Kirkland Lake. Where is that?
It's about 6 hours north of Toronto, 7 hours north of Toronto, depending on where you are in the GTA. My husband had moved there pretty much full time, and we were sort of popping back and forth and, splitting our time between, our parents down here and then up north. And then in 2017, my husband got sick, and he was assaulted by tenants, and he was unable to work after that. So he took some time off, and I moved up and started running the property management company full time. So we were actually, I consider myself really fortunate because, going through COVID up there was totally different than what everybody experienced with COVID down here. Small town, Northern Ontario, wintertime, it was just, it was a world of difference. And I think it was actually a blessing for us anyways. And and then I guess it was last year, end of 2022, I needed some medical care. I needed some surgery. And unfortunately, that's one of the downsides of living up north, is that there really wasn't much availability. So we moved back down here. I moved back down here. And so now we do the float back and forth thing again.
Okay, nice. And so what is your, generally, what have you done with your portfolio? And in the past 5 years or so, do you still own properties out in Nova Scotia? Do you still own a bunch in Kirkland Lake? Have you sold off a bunch?
Sold off a lot. Just about everything in New Brunswick we've sold now. We've sold off a good chunk of Kirkland Lake, and we're sort of repositioning what we have. We're optimizing, and I'm doing a lot of private lending these days. I just... when I started real estate investing, I didn't realize the power of the decisions I was making. And we had this vision for, passive and hands off. And then we opened a property management company, and we should have realized that was no longer passive or hands off. We just had this vision of having the staff and having the team. And I mean, you've got a large staff, you've got a big team, and your ability to take time off is completely dependent on how the team is functioning. So when they're struggling,
what's time off? What's
right?
That?
Exactly. And with what we did too, I mean, my husband's favorite saying was, we're in property management, this is not rocket science here. We are not saving lives. But the reality is, I wasn't comfortable. If you have a fire and you have a 24-hour fire watch afterwards, I'm not comfortable going to my staff hey, you're not going to bed tonight. So we took a lot of that, an emergency, middle of the night, overnight. We took a lot of that on. And I just found after 15 years, I was tired. So we closed our property management company earlier this year. And the freedom to have my time back and then to be doing private lending. And so I'm not actively, other than managing, my portfolio and my commercial building, I have so much time. It is so rewarding.
It's funny, this year has been the opposite for me. I'm working more than I have in anytime I can remember. So it's kind of the opposite.
And are you enjoying that, or is that something that you'd like to change in the future?
Within reason. I like the work I do, but it's just with us having pivoted where we were doing majority wholesaling to now we're doing maybe equal flipping, but that means we're flipping, I don't know, 50, 60, 70, 80 houses a year. We have 20 on the go at a time. It's a lot of renovations, and we weren't set up as a flipping company. We were set up as a wholesaling company. I used to flip. So I'm very involved in the flips, and luckily I have, some people on my staff who have stepped in and are really awesome, a construction manager, project managers, but it does keep me very involved, plus everything else I used to do on the rest of the wholesaling business and all of that. So I actually wasn't, a year, 2 years ago now, the winter 2 years ago, I went to Spain for 4 months for the winter in Canary Islands.
Beautiful picture.
And I was probably working 4 or 5 hours a day because I had the mornings off. Everyone was sleeping back home. And my phone wasn't ringing. Take the mornings to go get a bocadillo at a cafe. My daughter was in half-day preschool at the time. So, you'd pick her up there and bring her home for a nap at 1 o'clock. And then my phone would start ringing. And I'd work for, 4 or 5 hours and then be like, oh, well, it's 6 p.m. here. I'm off the clock kind of thing, and only deal with a few emergencies after hours. So it was really nice. And I was able to do that because I was majority wholesaling and I'd set up an awesome team, with 30 plus employees in the business. We had really people who knew their roles and are excellent at it. And most of the people in their roles in the wholesaling business are better at their jobs than I am. A lead manager, lead intake who's been answering phone calls for several years, I'm not going to do close to as good as they are, even because that's all they do. That's what they specialize in. Same thing with our acquisitions or dispositions. I'd step in for, legal issues or specific property construction, real estate investing kind of knowledge. That's my expertise. But on actually like some of that stuff, they're better at it than I am. So if they don't need to involve me, I don't get involved. I don't get in the way. But then as we change to flipping, I'm doing a lot more. And it's interesting that you're talking about private lending, because I just had a conversation with my team and a mentor of mine. And I think we're actually going to pivot to the way we're financing a lot of flips. Like I said, we have 20 on the go. It ties up a lot of our active capital in the business, our working capital in the business, doing the down payments and renovations and all of that. So we're actually going to be working with individuals, private lenders, and we're going to be looking to get first, rather than going through mix for everything, we're going to be going to private individuals to get first mortgages that cover a large portion of our renovations as well, right off the bat. And so we're not funding as much out of pocket, but then the benefit of that is it will leave substantially more of our working capital in the business. So if, let's say, we raise, X amount of money to do this property and we actually go over budget on the renovations later, well, we'll have large reserves for that. Or if, we end up losing money on a property, which happens rarely, we win the majority of the time, but occasionally we lose on a property, then there's no issue because we're going to have all this extra cash sitting on the sideline because we have, honestly, millions of dollars in our flips. But when you're doing 20 flips on the go, that goes very quickly in renovations and down payments and all that. So we're planning on changing the business model or the financing model to one where we go to private individuals and raise the purchase price as well as a portion of the renovation.
That's awesome. And, it's such an entrepreneurial thing to do, to be like, this is working or this isn't working, or I see an opportunity here. And then just to be able to say, hard right and change the course of direction for the ship, to be able to, I love that about being an entrepreneur. I don't have to check in with people. I don't have to ask, is this okay to say, like you, I think good real estate investors recognize opportunity for growth and they change it. And it sounds like you've done that. You're part of the 7-figure flipping community out of the US too, and they have phenomenal.
It's an excellent group. We really like people. It's actually funny. The person I was talking about, the mentor, he's no longer with the group either, but he was a coach in the group when I started there. The first time I met him, he gave me some great advice. One of the reasons I call him, he always challenges me, and I love it. He said, this guy's name is Don Costa. He's a high volume flipper out in California, Fresno, California. Really, really nice guy too. Hosts a podcast called the Flip Talk Podcast, and he's been investing since forever. Learned a lot of lessons losing it all in the 2008 recession in the States too. He lost it all and started again. And kind of like we talk about on this podcast is the lessons we've learned from our best and worst deals. I enjoyed learning from the things he did wrong and how to protect yourself going forward. So anyways, I had a call with him. But the first time I met him, I had one employee, an assistant, and she wasn't working out. And I told him, when I was in San Diego where I met him, and I told him, I'm going to have to let her go when I go back. And he asked me, did she fail you or did you fail her? I'm like, oof, ouch, that hurt. Because I had failed her as well.
Yeah.
Yes, she failed me, but I'd failed her as well. Now, in this case, it was past the point of being able to save that. But after that, I looked at every time we hired employees, if someone wasn't working, I'd always ask myself, have we given them the tools? Have we given them resources? Have we given them the training that they need to succeed? Because you can't say someone's not the right fit if you haven't given them a chance.
Yeah.
So is it their fault they're failing in the role, or is it your fault that they're failing in the role? And if it's your fault, then see what you can do to improve that. And if it's their fault, then they're not the right fit. But yeah, that was just the first time I met him. He challenged me on that. I'm like, oh, yeah, good advice.
Not everybody's up for those kinds of conversations, right? Like you could, using your example, you could even go back further and go, did you write the right job description so that it's actually reflective of what they're going to be? And did you hire the right person with the right personality and skill set to be able to execute that job description effectively? So yeah,
Definitely.
A lot of entrepreneurs are like, oh, it's not me, it's you. But as with most relationships, it's not you, it's me.
Yes, and I think you need a little bit of that humility or willingness to, being too confident, overly cocky in this business is a good way to miss the mistakes you're making and lead yourself to failure. Even when looking at properties, if you think you know better than everyone else and everyone else is telling you, hey, this doesn't work, you're like, no, I know better, and you go and do it. It might not work out.
Yeah. And it's a fine line too between, taking everybody's advice and trying to do what everybody else is doing and listening to yourself and your gut and what your inner voice is telling you is the right thing. And, sometimes the ego tips down on the right side of that line and sometimes it's on the wrong side.
Yes, because there's a lot of naysayers too. A lot of people getting started in real estate don't do it because people tell them, like, what about tenant problems and toilets and the landlord-tenant board and this and that? And I remember I was at a real estate investing meetup where you wouldn't expect that kind of negativity sometimes years ago. And I was telling someone, I'd been successfully marketing for off-market residential properties for a long time at that point. And I said, I'm going to start doing this on multifamily properties. I'm going to, speak to some of the owners directly, try to see if I can negotiate some deals. And she told me, no, there's no way anyone who owns, apartment buildings is going to sell it privately. There's no way you're going to find any good deals on that kind of stuff. That was kind of like, watch me.
That sounded like a challenge.
Just watch. Yeah. And I went and I mean, it's definitely much more difficult to buy apartment buildings privately than it is houses. But I successfully bought, many apartment buildings privately at good prices that worked out to as full burrs, where we got a good deal off the bat. So definitely was doable, but it was funny. Even within the real estate investment community, you can be told that it's not going to work.
There's naysayers everywhere, for sure.
Exactly. So
I was just going to say, are you seeing a comeback now for wholesaling with, so many people who own properties in distress? Are you seeing wholesaling picking back up yet, or is that not, we haven't turned that corner yet?
It's been pretty consistent that we've still been able to buy good deals throughout all of this. The difference is on the wholesaling side specifically, you need the investor sentiment to be there. Investors need to be buying. And we found the investor sentiment a little bit too weak. And that's why we pivoted heavily to flippers to flipping, because the retail buyers are there. People still need houses. So, when you look at the sales volume from, I was looking at Toronto real estate market, the sales volume, not prices, from September of 2021 to September of 2022 dropped 45%. It was September of 2022 was 55% of the number of sales as September 2021. Huge drop. To me, that still meant 55% of the number of transactions were still selling. And without a huge glut of inventory, which there hasn't been, people still need to buy your product, still going to sell. So the theory behind going to more flipping was, if we bring this product instead of investor grade fixer uppers, bring it to the retail level, there's people who need to buy these as homes. And our properties consistently sell, usually within the first couple of weeks, if not, at least the first month. We sell our properties quite quickly. So we have proven that retail buyers are still there for sure.
And I think you raise a really good point, because if you only ever listened to what was said on the news and you didn't go and get your own numbers, you might have made a different decision. But because you got really granular and looked at the specific numbers for what you do, you were able to figure out the right pivot to make.
Yeah, and we had to. We could have, but with the size of our business and then our employees it wasn't an option to just sit back and wait and watch. So we had to pivot, and we did, and we've been doing quite well on the flips. The flips have been good. So yeah. So tell me a bit about the coaching you do.
Sure, I love coaching. I don't do it because I have to. I do it because I love it. So there was a lot of people in my journey who helped me along the way, who helped me become who I am as a person, but also as an investor. And there are people, like Jean Lebeau from Rich Dad, who, 15 years later, I still remember him and the impact he had on me. And my way to give back now in the world of real estate is to do coaching and to do it as transparently and as honestly as possible. So I share with people, here are the mistakes I made. Here are the challenges I had. Here, this was my downfall. And one of the things that I didn't expect, but that I love about coaching, is I do a lot of coaching on real estate. People come to me because they want to learn how to do rent-to-owns, or how to do multifamilies, or how to start a real estate business. But I spend a lot of time talking about other things with people. We talk about, like this morning, I had a great conversation with someone, and it was about his confidence and what was having an impact on his confidence, and what was the story that he was telling himself that was preventing him from moving forward. So we talk a lot about mindset, and we talk about motivation, and we talk about personal development as well. And my journey with each of my clients is totally different. So it's not like, and I mean, I know, multifamilies, we always have different challenges, but I find a lot of real estate can be systemized and it's quite repetitive, and nothing about coaching is the same.
I think that's really good that you modified, because I think we've seen some coaching programs lead to disaster in Ontario in particular. And in part, it's because they use the same thing for everyone. It was, from at least what I saw from the outside, it was overemphasizing only mindset. Mindset is incredibly important, but if it's all mindset, like, you just need to get in your mind, if you just go tie up a deal, go buy it, you'll find the money later, and this and that. And they never learn the fundamentals, the substance behind it, on how to actually do those deals. So some people will have the mindset but not the substance, and with the flexibility to coach people on what they need, you can then coach them on the substance, how to properly analyze deals, make sure they're buying the right deals, how to ensure they're going to be able to get the capital once they do. And on the other side, you're going to have people who understand the fundamentals but don't have the mindset, don't have or different parts of the mindset that they're going to need, but they don't have the confidence to go in and do the deal, or they're not ready to take action. So I think that's a really helpful thing in coaching, to be able to modify what people need to their situation.
Absolutely. And I feel for new investors. I mean, we had our own challenges, you and I, starting back when we did, before 2008, and, having come through that. But I find that investors right now are struggling a lot with overwhelm. So they're overwhelmed with information, and then they don't know who to trust. And most people in the real estate world right now, they're very good at marketing themselves. They've got a presence on social media. They've got, some great, some ClickFunnels, or, not really websites anymore, but, they just have, the great marketing material. They have the reels on TikTok, or the videos on TikTok, and the reels on Instagram. And, they got kind of that piece of it down. And then you have a conversation with them, and they come across as really polished and strong, but who's talking about the challenges, and who's talking about the mistakes they made? And that's why I was so excited when you asked me to be a guest. And I love that you talk about best and worst deals, because if people only talk about their best deals, they're not talking about the ones where they learned the most, because that's where your worst deals are. They're your biggest opportunities to learn. And quite honestly, if you don't learn the lessons you need to learn from that horrible deal, if you don't have the humility to look back and learn what you need to learn, then you're going to learn it again and again and again until you go, okay, I surrender. Like, I get it. I need to stop doing this, this, and this.
Well, that's perfect timing for a transition. Let's move on to talk about the best and worst deal you've ever done. So let's start with either the best deal you've ever done or your favorite deal that you've ever done.
So it's funny because if we had talked a year ago, I probably would have told you that my worst deal, one of my worst deals that I ever did or that I disliked the most was my commercial building. And now a year has gone by and I'll tell you it's my favorite deal.
Okay. And what about it makes it your favorite deal?
I love the control that I have. I love the fact that I have this, 30,000 square foot building, and I literally have the opportunity to decide what I want to do with each piece of it. And in the commercial space, there's a lot less rules. There's a lot less like Big Brother, you must do this, blah, blah, blah. Like I have the freedom to go, okay, I have 3,000 square feet here. It used to be a commercial kitchen where they made the meals for all the seniors who were here in the home. What do I want to do with this? So I was literally on Facebook the last couple of days and I'm like, hey, I have this dining room. I have this 2,000 square foot activity room. What would you, as people living in this community, like to see? And I thought for sure it was going to be self-storage. Like I was all over that. I'm like, I am going to put in self-storage. And the crazy thing, what idea got the most traction in the community? A vendor's market. They literally want me to throw some tables in and like rent out a bunch of tables for like all the people who are doing, I don't know, like all the, Sensi and like all those kind of MLM type things. They're like, hey, we'd love a physical location. Yeah. We'd love to come and rent a table and basically and I'm like, it's going to cost me thousands to put in self-storage. You're telling me I can go to Costco, buy $100 tables, and that's all you guys want? No modifications to the building, nothing. I'm like, I could still do self-storage, but I would be a fool if I missed out on this opportunity. And I'm literally like, okay, if I picked 4 weekends before Christmas and basically said, vendor's market, $300 for a table for 4 weekends, who's in? I kind of think that's going to end up happening. So now I've just found a way to make money while I'm exploring my other options and my long-term solutions. Not only that, I went, okay, well, I was looking for what I was going to do with the 2,000 square feet downstairs, but I have this other space upstairs that's 1,000 square feet. So I'm going to flip the vendor's market upstairs. I'm going to leave the 2,000 square feet still available, and I'm going to pilot or test this in literally probably the best time of the year to do that, which is the 4 weeks leading up to Christmas.
Very cool. Very cool. The part you said you were saying about the large kitchen reminded me of something I worked on a long time ago. And it was, I was just helping with it, but it was an old restaurant, or it had been a restaurant that closed. And the space, we took over the space, turned the front into a kind of storefront. At the back, we kept it as a restaurant. It had a back entrance. And this was in Toronto. Keel and Bloor. And Toronto had rules around food preparation. So if you were catering, serving food, you had to have stainless steel surfaces. It had to be like a licensed kitchen that you prepared food in. And so we essentially took over a restaurant space and set up as 2 businesses. One was a storefront in the front and completely locked off and separate. We rented out the kitchen to people who wanted a licensed kitchen for catering stuff by the hour. So you could run your own catering business. Someone prepared like high-end dog food, like using venison and stuff like that. And they would rent out the space to use it, a licensed commercial kitchen. So it's just interesting all the different things you can do with it. I think one of the nice things is it sounds like the space you have is very flexible in terms of zoning, because sometimes you do run into less flexible commercial space on zoning and you're kind of limited in what you can do a little bit more. But it sounds like you have a wide variety of uses there, which is very helpful.
Yeah. Well, when we originally bought the building, it was institutional. And we really were hopeful that it would stay that way. But the town came to us and they're like, no, we want to rezone it mixed use commercial. And it cost us quite a bit, but it actually gave us tremendous flexibility with it.
So what lessons did you learn from your favorite deal here?
So one of the things is make sure you ask before you decide. So if I had just run straight down the, self-storage route, I might have missed the mark in terms of what the community needs right now. And maybe, that's not taking it off the table, but that tells me that I don't have to execute it immediately in order to make money. So don't disregard the short-term opportunities to make money because you're so fixated on what you think is the right decision for the future. That's definitely one of them. Your team is everything. So I have a housekeeper there, and she is absolutely fantastic, takes tremendous pride in what she does, ton of attention to detail. So could I find another housekeeper for less money per hour? Absolutely. But her attention to detail and the amount of love she has for the building and the care she takes is absolutely irreplaceable. So I'll keep giving her generous raises every year in order to keep her there.
Yes, and absolutely, especially for short-term rentals, Airbnbs, having a reliable, good cleaner is so important.
Oh, absolutely.
One of the most important parts of running an Airbnb, in my opinion.
Yeah. Other lessons, if something isn't working, take action immediately. It's the whole hire slowly, fire quickly. It's the same thing for if you make a decision, don't be afraid to acknowledge it's not working and pivot quickly, because the longer you keep trying to give stuff time to sort itself out and everything else, the harder it is to come back from that. And then I think probably the number one lesson overall is know your numbers. And one of the reasons I didn't realize how much the building was struggling before was because I was looking at the global numbers for the portfolio. So I didn't realize how much this one particular asset was struggling. And had I known, I would have stepped in an awful lot.
That makes sense. Well, I really like that your favorite deal is one that was didn't go well, and then you made it go well afterwards. So that's really great. So now tell me about the worst or your least favorite deal you've ever done.
It depends what your criteria is for what the worst deal is. And I think a lot of investors would tell you the worst deal is the one where they lost the greatest amount of money. For me, the worst deal was the one where the partnership fell apart, because that one, money is money and you can always make more. But what hurt me was the relationship that fell apart. And we did a rent-to-own. I made the mistake of trusting and not doing contracts. And then my partner, our money partner on the deal, had another sort of endeavor with somebody else, and that didn't go well. And there was this whole kind of snowball effect. And, my deal got lumped in with their deal. And then they started second guessing everything and questioning everything, and they lost trust in us. And then the tenant buyer didn't buy exactly according to the contract. And so there was some wiggle room, there's some negotiation room. And instead of trusting us, all trust had been lost. They cut us out and they started negotiating directly with the tenant buyer. They did things that they shouldn't have done. And then when the deal finally closed, they said, there's no contract, we're not paying you anything. So, aside from the money that was lost on that deal, what hurt me more than anything was that the damage to that relationship. I would never want that to happen. I would never want someone to lose trust or to believe that I was coming in with anything less than the best of intentions for everybody. So that took me a while. There was definitely some sleepless nights and some, what could I have done differently? What could I have done better? My number one outcome of that obviously was contracts. Never trust. It doesn't matter how well you know someone. It doesn't matter whether they're family or, the person that you grew up living next to since you were 2 years old. Contracts, always contracts, because they just clear everything. They clear the water. They make sure that in the event that the communication isn't clear down the road, that there is a prescribed solution. And then my other takeaway was register those contracts on title so that when there's, lawyers and a closing happens, they can't pretend that there wasn't a contract.
Sometimes even I've done deals with my best friend, and in the past we always not necessarily about deals, but we've always written up some version of it, even if it's just an email to one another confirming the terms we agree on something. And we've talked about it, and it's not that I don't trust you. It's that it could be that, but it's also, I might not remember. We might remember this differently. oh, you remembered that you were supposed to put in 30 grand, but you were going to get 60% back of the deal. And I remembered, oh, we had actually talked about 45 grand, or, something like that, right? So neither of us would have bad intentions in that. But if we don't write it down, our memory, when we're doing a bunch of different things, a bunch of different deals, a few years pass, you might not remember the details in the same way. So there could be no ill intentions at all, but having it written down, or, if it's a more formal thing, then if it's a large actual, purchase together or something, and having a contract for it, that can just help ensure there's no confusion, because there's been times early on, and it was smaller amounts. It was, we were renovating something, I'm paying for some expenses and things, where I wasn't logging things right. And I had full intentions to make sure I paid him in full, and he had full intentions to make sure he paid me in full. And then we did, but neither of us were really sure that it was the right amount because we weren't documenting it well enough. So neither of us tried to screw the other one. It's who knows who got a little more than they were supposed to or less. We're not sure. I mean, it's fine. It was small amounts of money anyways at the beginning, but this just helped ensure when you track it properly that you're not going to accidentally make mistakes or forgetfully do so. So
I agree. If I had to pick the top two reasons why investors struggle or have some costly learning opportunities, the number one is ego, and the number two is lack of discipline. So, letting your ego get in the way of what should be done, and then, not documenting your expenses, not keeping track of things, not filing things, not, doing your bookkeeping every month so that you know what your numbers actually truly are in your portfolio. These are the kinds of things that, and especially as you get bigger, we get complacent, right? And that's where the ego piece comes in. It's like, oh, it'll be fine. I'll sort it out. Oh, I made money over here, so it doesn't matter that I lost a little. Like, these are kind of the little stories that our ego tells us that can actually be the beginning of our downfall. So we need to make sure we stay consistent, stay disciplined, and stay humble.
That's a great way of putting it. All right, let's move on to our final questions of the day. First one, what has changed about your approach to real estate investing with your experience?
I don't force things anymore. I remember, doing my first deals, and I was so anxious and I was so emotional, and I would force things. I have to find a partner, and I would bring like this, I almost feel like it would have been like a frantic energy. And I thought it was taking action, and what I was doing was forcing things. And now I'm much more like, if this is meant to be, it'll play out. If this is the right partner, they will come forward. If this is, if I have built a good enough deal, then these solutions will present themselves. So I don't force things like I used to. I look for alignment in a way that I never did before.
I think that can be really helpful to some of the newer investors. If you could go back in time, what's one piece of advice you'd have for younger you?
Make sure you understand the alignment between choosing your market and choosing your strategy. So some of the mistakes I made in the beginning were taking a strategy that I knew and loved, like rent-to-owns, and dumping it into a market like New Brunswick, and then it didn't go well. And if I had fully understood, how to analyze the market, what to look for, then I would probably have realized that New Brunswick was a market that carried greater risk for that potential strategy, and I might have made a different decision.
Oh, okay, really good point. And lastly, what is the most overlooked or the most overhyped investing strategy you see right now? In general, or specifically like adding a basement apartment / duplex property as a BRRRR?
It's more...
And you mean overlooked, I assume. Sorry, overhyped.
Yeah, overhyped. It's more about the belief that new investors have that if they buy something that's in rough shape and they fix it up, that they'll instantly, 5 minutes later, be able to refinance it, put all their money back out again. I don't think it's the strategy that's overhyped. I think it's the way that it's portrayed on social media, and the fact that people aren't talking about, yes, this worked in 2021, but it's not working right now. So there's a lot of investors who are coming to me going, I'm trying to do this strategy and I can't make it work. What am I doing wrong? And I'm like, absolutely nothing. You don't understand the interplay between the exit strategy and the current market condition. That's what the problem is. It's not the market that it was in 2021. So you're following these people who are like, oh, I did 30 BRRRRs in a year and I'm awesome. And then you're trying to make it work in a market that's completely different. So it's not the strategy itself that's overdone. But I also think the whole concept of pulling all of your money back out again and leaving no money in a deal, I think that's a little overplayed as well, because what people don't talk about is the downside to that is being over leveraged. And when our interest rates are 7%, can you still, with no money down in the deal, maybe you would have been better to be at 65% loan to value instead of 85.
Yeah. And to be fair, it's not like nobody does those anymore. They still happen.
Yeah.
And that's what you might still see on social media, right? You have people talking about having done a full BRRRR this year.
Yeah.
Great. But that's not the norm.
Those are the home runs. Those aren't the base hits. And, if I have with my coaching clients, what I focus on is 1 or 2 solid deals a year to build your wealth over time. It's not 15 deals this year and then never work again.
Yeah, exactly. So let's talk about your coaching. How can people find out more about you? How can they reach you? How can they learn about your coaching?
Thanks, Luke. You can find me on Instagram, Facebook, Elizabeth Kelly Consulting. I'm now loosely on TikTok. I have 3 videos I need to put more up, but I have a website, ekconsulting.ca. I promise I'm not hard to find. I have a YouTube channel with, wonderful guests like you, because I host a couple of webinars, free webinars a month, just basically wanting to share amazing people like you with the world who have something great to share, and, ways that people can learn without without cost being a huge barrier to entry.
Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you, Elizabeth. I think this is a really great podcast. I think you have a wealth of experience. You've done a lot of different things, more than most. Not just been successful in one area, but you've tried out everything and done well in most of it, at least. So I think people will learn a lot from today. And thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you, Luke. You've done a great job hosting.